Our next presenter grew up in Palo Alto and has seen the Bay Area grow and develop. An architect and advocate for smart growth and transit-oriented development, he's now using technology to help cities and counties with the zoning and planning process. Please join me in welcoming the co-founder of UrbanFootprint, Peter Calthorpe.
All right, I don't need any of these mics, right? Nope. I'm mic'd. So I don't think it's going to take a lot of explanation to people who live anywhere in Silicon Valley to understand the housing crisis. But the numbers are astounding, and we've been stuck for decades. We've been talking about it and getting nowhere. Well, actually, we've been getting farther and farther behind in terms of housing to job ratios. Statewide, McKinsey did this study. We're short 2.5 million units of housing. We know that drives up costs. We know that produces long commutes. We know that puts stress on workforce, which puts stress on business. We know that trickles down to low-income households under more stress and right down to the bottom to homelessness. It is at the core of the well-being of our community here, and yet we can't seem to grapple with it. And the numbers get worse. Look at this. Over the last 8 years, we produce all the jobs. No city will say no to a commercial development, but housing units falling farther and farther behind. And this is a pattern that's really unsustainable. You could say it's already unsustainable. In San Francisco, the numbers are even more stunning. So I don't think I need to convince you we have a crisis here. Hand in hand with that crisis is the solution used to be housing farther and farther at the periphery of the region. Longer and longer commutes were the penalty, more and more congestion, but that's where the affordable housing was way out there. It wasn't near the job centers. So over the years, we developed a piece of software that allowed us to look very simply and quickly at scenarios at scale, citywide, region-wide, neighborhood-wide. But a planning tool that lets you think out loud effectively allowed you to do thought experiments. And so today I'm going to present a thought experiment. It's got this capacity to crunch all the data that's dispersed. It lets you build scenarios, the what ifs that really matter in terms of being creative about solving problems. And it analyzes the impacts of scenarios across a whole range of metrics. Because one issue is not the only issue. Air quality, affordable housing, congestion, climate change, all these things are linked through urban design. And at this point, because of the analytical capability, we can access 1 million parcels and thousands of data sets. We can be much more intelligent for the average practitioner in a planning department than ever before. And this kind of makes planning almost democratic. So let me show you how this is actually sorted out. It evolved over years of planning that we were doing where we really understood that unless you gave people choices and analyzed the choices, you weren't going to get to consensus. So process matters. And we've had lots of successes all around, actually around the world, starting in Portland with the TOD, LA, Chicago. I mean, there's a ton of examples. The only place we haven't been successful is the Bay Area, my home. And that's what kind of breaks my heart. And so we started doing some pro bono thinking about it. And we start with this proposition. Where people live and how the quality of the neighborhood determines a lot of their lives. So look at these 3 neighborhoods. You probably all know them. San Ramon is like regular sprawl. Rockridge, a historic streetcar suburb in San Francisco. And we know what the morphology of development is. It's auto-oriented out in the sprawl where everything is surrounded by parking lots. You don't go anywhere without your car as your companion. Rockridge, resurgent, wonderful place. And low density. It's not as if the solution is high-rise housing at every BART station. San Francisco is doing a damn good job of infill housing, but it can't shoulder the burden of the job growth in Silicon Valley. Look at the difference when we analyze it across these 3 neighborhoods. In carbon emissions, 3 times different. Where you live and what kind of house you choose determines your most important environmental, economic, and social outcomes. Land consumption, if you care about environmental issues, and household VMT. You know, this is what drives our congestion issues. You can look at the Bay Area and quickly understand the problem. The jobs are clustered in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County. That's where the jobs are. The rest are either balanced counties or they're actually housing reservoirs. But the problem is they're all on the other side of the bay, and we only have so many crossings. So the answer, I think everybody knows, is infill. But let's do the numbers. So this is a scenario. We did this for the Bay Area some years ago. And we said, what if we grew business as usual, which is largely single family in more and more remote locations? And what if we grew largely, the blue color represented Rockridge, bungalows, townhouses, small apartment buildings, mixed-use, walkable, transit-served. And the differences, and I'm not going to dwell on any of these metrics, but the differences are stunning. The amount of land, the amount of cost for infrastructure, the VMT, which of course is at the heart of air quality and carbon emissions, building energy, water consumption, which of course we all know here. Everything heads in the right direction when we move towards infill, compact, mixed use. So on some level, we know what the solution is. Where we're stuck today is how do we get there? This is LA with a compact future. This is LA with a projection of existing development patterns. I mean, it is profound. And the truth is, we're now being stuck, at least in the Bay Area, where we can't even sprawl anymore. We can't even choose the sprawl option, as bad as it is. So we have no option, which is why we have the housing deficit. Well, a lot of ideas are being thrown up in the air in Sacramento. One good one is ancillary dwelling units. They're small. They fit a certain market segment. They change the neighborhood character, probably for better, and they're scattered sites. They come in all sorts of different forms, but can they be the core of the solution? There's additional legislation that's being floated now for higher density ancillary units. As a matter of fact, SB 50, I think, allows 40-foot buildings in single-family neighborhoods. Just watch what happens to political constituencies when that happens. Infill will never recover from the backlash if this stuff goes through. And it's not that I'm not an advocate for infill. I'm just not an advocate for political suicide. But if you keep it, if you keep it at the level of 1 unit, you know, so it really is an added income. It's a student. It's a senior. It's a set of friends, extended family. It's a good thing. But it only gets us so far, maybe 200,000 units. And the answer is scattered. This is what UrbanFootprint lets us do. We can actually look at exactly where all this stuff would be happening. It's not coordinated with jobs. It's not coordinated with transit. But it is a good thing, and it's a component of the solution. SB 50, very complicated. You know, they put a bunch of kind of fix-it duct tape around it, and you have exclusions and inclusions and, you know, economically sensitive areas and not. But the bottom line about SB 50 is it's headed has the wrong proposition, which is that the answer lies in converting residential land. In my mind, you don't want to touch residential land. You have an existing neighborhood with an existing character. I don't care if it's West Oakland, where if you had SB 50, they would be wiped out, but for the exclusion, which is just a temporary saving. Or if it's an apartment building, you don't want to lose those apartment buildings. And you don't necessarily need to invade those single-family neighborhoods to get the kind of housing we want. We did the analysis just for the TOD, the 1.5 mile. There's a bunch of other components to SB 50, very complicated. But You get under 1 million units. If you were to demolish everything within a half mile of a BART or Caltrain station, which I got a feeling if some of you are elected officials or work in city government, don't quite believe will ever happen. But it looks good on paper. And actually, back in the 80s, I wrote a book about transit-oriented development. It was kind of the first time anybody talked about that. So I'm the father of TOD, standing here saying, not a good idea right now. And it's not enough for a lot of reasons. Number one, there aren't enough stations to fill the need, even if you were to bulldoze every house around the stations, which you shouldn't. And then when you look at SB 50 hitting San Francisco, you're talking about, remember when we did urban renewal and we used to go in and we'd take out 8 city blocks and the political recovery would never happen? This would be over 100,000 units demolished to make way for slightly higher density development. So these things are not smart enough to solve the problem. Here's what I think is Grand Boulevards. It's an old idea. Actually, you had a Grand Boulevard strategy for El Camino. It's taking all the land along the Strip. Now, the Strip is a post-World War II American invention. Big street, lined by commercial development. And it used to be what was hypothetically the new version of the Main Street, but socially it never quite got there. It never really became Main Street. But it's everywhere in America. We have arterials lined with commercial land everywhere, in every community. It's ubiquitous, and it's outdated. Those big streets for cars only, that's outdated. That commercial land for distributing goods and services, outdated. Amazon is here. Those bricks and mortar places are closing. So let's go back to El Camino. 43 miles. And it was our first experiment. I asked the guys in the back of the room there to do a urban footprint analysis. What if we converted all just commercial? We didn't touch a single family house anywhere near El Camino. We didn't touch any apartment buildings, just converting low-rise, low-density commercial to mid-rise mixed use. Interestingly enough, you can look at where we're flood-prone and fire-prone. And those missionaries who laid out that street got it right a long time ago. But this is what it looks like. What a waste. In the heart of Silicon Valley, surface parking lots. On a right-of-way that could be a great transit boulevard because it's got the space. So in this picture, you have the solution to the housing problem and the solution to the transportation problem. You have a right-of-way that's big enough to put in the next generation of transit, and you have enough land, and we've done the numbers, to build 2 million units of housing. Oops, I jumped on my own finish line there. There's no reason El Camino couldn't look like this. And there are places like a Mountain View and parts of Redwood City where they're already doing this. So it's not as if it's untested, hypothetical, utopian. No, developers are all over this. The moment the entitlement's there, they're going to be there. And they're not going to be displacing housing. More of the Strip. That's a 120-foot right-of-way. That may not be meaningful, but look at, most of the development there is about a 0.2 FAR, if any of you know what that means, which is a floor area ratio. It's wasted land. It's a land bank that we should be using. This is Footprint identifying all the commercial property along the Strip and identifying where the Caltran locations are, not touching any residential. And what do we get on 43 miles? 250,000 households. And what is the impact of putting houses there? And by every metric, as I showed you before, the environmental and economic impacts come down. It's a win-win-win strategy. Now, there are cities, my own, Palo Alto, where I come from, which wouldn't have it. They don't even want Caltran to get better. They just, just leave us alone. We'll have the jobs and somebody else can deal with the housing. I'm not going to be popular in my hometown, but it's pathetic. Let's be honest. It's really pathetic. And let's not even talk about Atherton. No. But so the next thought was, what if we did this for the whole Bay Area? What would the number look like if we did it in the whole Bay Area? So that's what it looks like in the whole Bay Area. It looks like a light touch, you know? And it's distributed in a kind of equitable way, and it's always accessible to what should become the next generation of transit, and it gives us 2 million units of housing. And it's not all the same kind of housing. In this analysis, what we said was, at the low end density, it's around 30 units an acre. That's 4 lanes on 4-lane arterials, less than 2-acre land. And then all the way up at the highest end, yes, you'd have MacArthur-Bart type development if you had arterials and larger lots. But the median, around 50 units per acre, 4 stories. You still get the commercial ground floor development, so you still have community serving commercial in place. You also reap a huge economic benefit. So the other question everybody always says is, well, what about paying for all the infrastructure? Infill costs local jurisdictions in schools and parks and services, infrastructure upgrades, roads upgrades. Well, if you go from 0.2 FAR commercial, which is not under high demand in that condition, all the way up to, say, 2.0, which would be housing over shops, keeping maybe about the same amount, you have a land value increase that's big enough to drive property taxes high enough to actually demand inclusionary, to demand a in lieu fee for schools, parks, and to have an assessment for transit improvements. So it's a self-financing housing strategy. And it's kind of distributed just the way you'd like it. Look at this. Most of it is in Santa Clara. Sorry, who's from Santa Clara? Nobody's sponsoring here. But the point is, between Santa Clara and San Mateo, this is the majority of the housing. That's where it should be, because that's where all the jobs are. It puts workforce housing near jobs, and it puts it on streets that we can use. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on San Francisco, but San Francisco's got its own strategies, and they're actually kind of a little bit ahead of the rest of the region in terms of being housing aggressive. So this is a picture, once again, of those threatened areas, and once again, it's the right location because of jobs and transit. It's the right location because of fire and flood. And once again, if you built housing in those locations, all these impacts would be improved. Water, energy, driving, emissions, and household costs. We are in a crisis of affordability, and it's not just the rent or the mortgage. It's a whole lifestyle. If you're lucky enough to get your housing at 35% of income, you're typically at 20 to 25% of income going to transportation. It's a huge financial burden. And living in a place where you don't have to commute as long, where you can maybe have 1 car instead of 2, or 0 cars instead of 1, which a lot of people do, my kids do, if you make that feasible, that's maybe even a bigger savings in terms of meeting the affordable housing crisis. All right, so what's the other ingredient? How much time do I have? Where's the clock? Oh, I better slow down. Although I know there's going to be plenty of questions. I'm hoping there'll be lots of questions. I love, we need cynics. So there's no question that the single car cannot exist into our future. I mean, we don't have enough asphalt. We don't want to pay. That's another housing burden. Whenever you say each house has to have 2 cars, or maybe 1 car per bedroom, or something like that, that parking stall costs $20,000. I mean, we can talk all day and all night about housing subsidies, but just by reducing household VMT and reducing the cost of parking, you have gotten people a huge leg up in affordable workforce housing. Now, we have a decent infrastructure here. This is all of our good stuff, Caltrain and BART and the light rail systems. And certainly we have to, add to that. We need backbone for a great global city with a global economy. We need these backbone investments, and I believe there's some legislation at play to get that done. No question about it. Furthermore, express regional buses are an important ingredient. Just hopping on the freeway and being able to go faster than the cars is a huge incentive to leave your car at home or to not own it. So we got to make all these things happen. And this is a very low cost, very high benefit strategy. A lot of places are considering bus rapid transit. Do you all know what bus rapid transit is? I'll get into it, but it is the most affordable transit system. It's the transit of choice by most of the world today because its capacity is high. But the key is, until we get transit near everybody's home, transit is not going to be a great option. Transit has to become ubiquitous in order to really be useful. Everybody talks about first mile, last mile, but when it's the first 5 miles and the last painful mile, the disincentives are too great. When you think about what I just said, the grand boulevards, taking those 4 and 6 lane streets and lining them with mixed use, this is the network of access. What you begin to see is a transit hierarchy that lets you get anywhere from anywhere easily. And the more transit you have, the more useful, the easier it is. But how can we get it done? A lot of people are saying, don't worry about it. Autonomous vehicles are going to solve everything. It's the opposite. Autonomous vehicles are going to make things worse. They're going to add vehicle miles traveled. If there's anything worse than a single occupant vehicle, it's a zero occupant vehicle. And all the data shows that there's going to be lots of zero occupant vehicles. What if you go shopping and there's no easy parking, or they want to charge you for parking? You can just send your car out and it'll just circle until you're ready to pick it up. Or let's say you take your car to work, parking's too expensive, you send it to a remote location, or you even send it home so somebody else can use it during the day. This is all, there's a lot of analysis now, 35% increase if it's privately owned. If it's Uber or Lyft, under shared occupancy rates, because of deadheads, it's 30 to 60% more vehicle miles. And if people choose, once they get in that autonomous Uber, to do it alone, which they do a lot, it could be a doubling of VMT per capita. This isn't, just imagine what happens to our road network, our circulation system, with these kinds of explosions in VMT. No, autonomy is not the answer for private vehicles. It is the answer for transit, and I'll get into that in a minute. So I mentioned bus rapid transit. It's simple, powerful, affordable transit. It is faster than local buses, but it's not that fast. Typically, it doesn't have express, passing lanes, but it's globally tested and really works, and it fits. Here's El Camino. You know you're in a great place when you can't tell if the building is a parking lot or an office building, but that's a typical cross-section in El Camino, through the heart of the wealthiest region in the world. It's just astounding to me, this resource. 120 feet, I'm an urban designer, gets you this. Wide sidewalks, 2 exclusive bike lanes, BRT, or I'm calling it ART, I'll get there in a minute, and still 6 goddamn lanes of traffic. We can do without them, but over time. Let's not move too quickly. So we have the resource in the right-of-way to actually build this. Now, in China today, they already have operating autonomous buses, and I think autonomy will be the next generation of transit. That's where this technology needs to be focused, not in private vehicles. And of course, they're very excited about this. These actually then operate in exclusive lanes, of course, which means that the autonomous technology, its threshold of of safety performance is much lower if they have protected space to move in. I.e., we could get it on the road in 5 years, as opposed to nobody quite knows the litigious path that private go-anywhere autonomous vehicles will have. I think that there will be major legal setbacks for lots of different reasons. God bless it, because if they really came out at scale, we would have complete gridlock. But anyway, one of the advantages here is that they can pass in oncoming lane. So to have an express bus, you don't need a additional lane of width. They can just coordinate with one another. Now, even better is small autonomous vehicles. Why? Because you can actually organize them so they pick up in one location or two locations, and then they go direct to destination, which means your travel time is enhanced dramatically. If you're not stopping at every station, which is the norm for BART, BRT, there's very few express vehicles in those kinds of corridors. So all of a sudden, these guys can zip around, pick up a full load in one place and take it to one or two destinations, coordinated on your phone, and it can pass in oncoming traffic because it's fully coordinated with all the other vehicles in the right-of-way. So it's kind of a beautiful idea. And yes, it is being fully developed right now in Singapore. So this is not fantasy technology, just like the idea of building mixed-use multifamily on corridors is not a new idea. It's just taking good existing ideas to scale. And the numbers are kind of stunning for how this transit system we compared would work. Autonomous is the light yellow, light rail, bus rapid transit, standard bus. So the average speed is best with the small ART, nimble and direct express systems. The operations and maintenance costs come in half. The other problem, of course, with transit is that it operates in the red all the time, right? You know, so the cities or the jurisdictions have to subsidize it. Fare box is what? 50% at best, sometimes down to 20 or 30% of the cost of a system. What if it didn't cost so much? What if it were cheap and fast? If it were cheap and fast, we could have 4 to 5 times as much of it for the same dollar. So a lot of people fell in love with light rail. I did the Portland plan. But it's too expensive. The latest, these numbers are wrong. The latest numbers on light rail are like $100 million per mile. We can't afford to build enough of that to solve our problem. We need simple asphalt down the middle of a once ugly street. And we need the latest technology in moving vehicles on it. So construction costs down, O&M costs down, average speed up. This is a formula for what we need to do. LA, you know, it's fascinating to me that the idea of bus rapid transit is now becoming ubiquitous. And I think if we enhance it to ART, autonomous rapid transit, we have a system that can easily win on lots of levels. So to conclude, as much as I'm focused on housing and transportation, focus on everything. Here, because these are the special interest groups. These are all the people that are going to show up at the various political venues and advocate for their private concern. And the linkage between them is urban form. This is how all these different, if you're an environmentalist or a health advocate, a social equity advocate, if you care about economic development, if you're a private developer, everybody wins with these kinds of strategies. And you can demonstrate the numbers, the metrics to prove that everybody wins. And lo and behold, I think you can shape a real coalition. And in my last minute, I will talk about what we need to do to make this happen. We need smart state legislation. I don't think this is a city-by-city solution. And I don't think, unfortunately, as much as I love SB 375 and our regional plans, I don't think they have the teeth, the muscle, or the stick, or the carrots to make anything really happen. I think we need as of right which is not unlike SB 50, but as of right legislation that says if you have commercial land on a strip, the minimum development as of right would be this range based on different types of parcel size and location type. And cities would have an option to either just say, okay, we go along with this, or they would have an option to provide a better strategy. But one way or another, they have to hit the target that this kind of rezoning would allow. And then simultaneously, we need to pass bond initiatives to build the next generation of transit. And the next generation of transit should come from Silicon Valley. And we should stop having Silicon Valley talking about flying cars and autonomous vehicles. They should be talking about what's going to work for the planet and what's going to work for working people, not for the elite, which is really what autonomous vehicles would be for, and flying vehicles. So let's get on with those two things: bond initiatives for transit and as of right legislation on commercial land. And yes, burden the commercial as of right with affordable inclusionary zoning, burden it with impact fees, and burden it with assessment districts, because it can afford it. If you go 10 times the development capacity on your land, as a developer, you can afford to make those contributions. And I am stopping. Time's up. Why don't you jump up and down? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Peter, for that thought-provoking and provocative, might I add, presentation. So let's take about 5 minutes of Q&A from folks before we move on to the next panel. I have to think that generated some questions.
Are you? Oh, okay. Hi, Ann Schneider, Councilwoman, City of Millbrae.
Where? Oh, there you are.
Right here. I loved your diagrams. For everybody here, you may not realize that you've got residents from Silicon Valley, especially the west side, that drive all the way to Millbrae to catch the train or to catch BART. Well, we're having some construction projects starting soon, so just to let you know, that parking is going away. So I've got a question for you. One question is, how can you get more people from the west side of Silicon Valley, so the west of 280, to transit in their own communities as opposed to driving all the way north? And then my side question on that, this is again for everybody to know, our second TOD project is called Sarah Station. We're going to be a high-speed rail station someday, maybe. Former proponent, now not so much. High-speed rail just came in and said we're going to eminent domain a major portion of Millbrae from El Camino Real to the tracks from Millbrae Avenue North so that they can build a surface parking lot. So my perspective has been, we want to build the 444 or 488 housing units, but the transportation agencies are not our friends. So West Side Travel, transportation agencies. Thank you.
I'm not sure about the issue of West Side, so I can't answer that. I mean, you know, where are the corridors that are available to put ART on? I don't know. But you know, this the tragedy of all these missed opportunities when it comes to land utilization has got to stop. And I think the only way it stops is with intelligent state legislation that basically says, no, you don't get to build surface parking lots anywhere near transit, period, end of story. Right now, BART's doing a pretty damn good job, but it's what, 30 years late or something like that, of converting surface parking lots into mixed use with structured parking. So, you know, that just should be illegal. Now, yeah, high-speed rail has eminent domain. So I don't know what to say other than we do need legislation that makes it clear that for infill housing to really become a systemic solution, we can't afford to squander land in any way.
Lori Kretschmar. I'm not an expert in your area. This is fascinating. I love your Grand Boulevard thing.
Yeah.
And can you drill down a little bit? What would it take to really make it happen in San Mateo County? You mentioned intelligent state legislation, but what would our leaders need to do to really implement Grand Boulevard on a faster pace?
Well, you could just rezone. I mean, lots of communities do corridor studies, and they look Well, this started for me, I don't know, 15, maybe more than that, years ago, when Berkeley, which is not the most progressive place and is becoming a lot like Palo Alto in its attitudes, asked us to rezone University Avenue. University Avenue was the most crime-ridden part of Berkeley because it was just garbage. It was just parking lots and motels and single-story shops. And we rezoned it all for 50 unit per acre mixed use. And over the years, you can now drive down El Camino and you'll see it all rebuilt. And by the way, crime rate's gone way down. So individual cities and counties can simply do corridor plans. And I also recommend specific plan documents with those corridor plans to enhance density on those corridors. I just don't think, as good as that is, and I think, for example, Redwood City has done it and Mountain View has done it. There's a few forward-thinking cities. That's not going to solve our housing problem. It's got to be ubiquitous. It's got to be region-wide. Every city has to participate. Because quite frankly, the next element, which is the transit, goes city to city to city to city to city. And so there has to be collaboration at that scale.
Let's take one last quick question. Quick one, Charles.
Yeah.
You got the mic.
That's funny. Charles Stone, council member, City of Belmont. I also sit on the Caltrain board. 2 quick questions. First of all, I found your data fascinating. I think your presentation is great. I think the meat on the boat is in Santa Clara County. But my question to you is, given the fact that San Francisco's population in 1950 went down for the next 60 years and took until 2010 to recover, meanwhile, we grew by orders of magnitude 3 times. Is San Francisco really doing enough, 1? And 2, as someone who sits on a transit agency board, how do you balance the future needs of an organization like Caltrain with the desire to build housing along the right-of-way?
Future needs of Caltrans. I'm not sure I understand that question. The more people who live within walking distance of it, the better the ridership's going to be, the better the headways are going to be, the more efficient the operations are going to be. Everybody wins by putting people close by.
What I mean is there's certain portions of the right-of-way we think we're going to need to run the type of service that folks want to see. We could build on those, but then we're not going to be able to build the service we need later on.
I'm still not getting you. On the tracks?
On the right-of-way.
Oh, on El Camino.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of spaces I pointed out and measured for BRT, ART right-of-way. I mean, if you wanted to waste money, you could put a light rail down it. I mean, it's the same dimension for any of those options. You just need an exclusive right-of-way to give an advantage to people who are using transit. So they're not sitting in the same bumper-to-bumper environment as everybody else. Just give them the space. I mean, we collectively own that space. That's public domain, that right-of-way. And why do we give so much of it to cars when we want to discourage automobile use and encourage transit? It's a really simple thing. The same thing with bikes. I mean, biking and all these other modes of transportation for local trips, they can be part of that. You know, I work a lot in China right now. And it's fascinating, even in the biggest cities like Beijing, there's only 35% of households own cars. And yet they're designing their cities with giant 8 and 10 lane arterials. And the pedestrians and the buses are stuck in traffic and the bikes are no longer in existence. It's just a misallocation of public space. So we need to reallocate to the kinds of mobility that is most useful to the people we need to support, and that's the workforce.
All right, please join me in thanking Peter Calthorpe.
Hey, man.
Thanks, Peter. We'll talk more.